brothers and sisters. I hope your day is beautiful and being kind to you. I want to just pop in really quickly and leave a short yet vulnerable video with you. I want to share something that happened about a couple months ago at a restaurant with my son and my husband and I. At the end of our meal, there was a tablet at the table, and anytime we're at a restaurant with a tablet at the table, my son likes to do the survey at the end of paying. And so my son was doing the survey, and he was at the question that asks whether or not we were satisfied with our server. And my husband goes, yeah, they were very attentive to our needs. They were very friendly, kind. I'd say I was highly satisfied. What do you think? And my son goes, very matter-of-factly, he's 5 years old, he goes, I don't really like people with dark skin, so I'm going to put satisfied rather than highly satisfied. My eyes welled up. I stared at my husband, took a deep breath, didn't address it in the moment. And that was intentional. I will likely use this example in liberatory embodiment as a learning of how we ultimately responded to that. But I wanted to share that with you to let you know that no matter how much of an expert we are at in racial equity and justice or social equity and justice, we are human beings in a society that was built on false narratives about who was worthy of love, who was worthy of success, who was worthy of safety. And even a race equity expert that I am, all the books, all the representation, I am a biracial Black woman. My son has Black family members. Even in the midst of that, my son internalized what it meant to be light-skinned and dark-skinned in this society. So for the second half of this video, I wanted to share a little bit about how I responded to my son's comment at the restaurant. So number one, I understood my son's capacity to respond to any feedback or even exploratory questions that I was going to present to him. And so I think that's the first thing, is to understand knowing your children's personality and their capacity for certain truths that always should come into play, because you as a parent know the best about your child. So in the moment, we did nothing. Later that afternoon, when I knew that he was in a environment that he was familiar with, I brought it up again, and that is what I want to talk you through. But before I do that, I wanted to share a little bit about our minds. I teach this in my liberatory embodiment program, but if you've been following me for some time, you've probably heard me talk about this one way or another. But I really do believe that our understanding of our minds and the way they work is so critical to us being conscious, racially conscious beings in society. And I really believe that our Creator knew what they were doing when they created us. And one of the women I follow, her work, and she does a lot of conscious and subconscious mind work, she says that the mind is the soul's most powerful tool. And I couldn't agree more. For an example, I'm going to share another example of my son. This was many months ago, but he fell and he scraped his knee. And but he had pants on, and so he didn't actually see the cut, got right back up, finished the walk. They were out in our neighborhood walking, my son and my husband. And when they returned home, my son, being very sensitive to pants and long sleeves, the minute he steps into the door, like his mama, he changes into shorts and a t-shirt. And so he changed into shorts and a t-shirt, and that's when he saw that there was a little bit of a scrape and some blood. And that's when he got upset about the cut on his knee. And for 5 days after he fell, he would not put any weight on that knee. And we actually started getting concerned, because we were like, surely, I mean, he got right back up and he walked the rest of the neighborhood walk. But that's just an example of how powerful our minds are. That as soon as he saw the cut on his knee, he had a belief that that cut, the blood, meant that he couldn't put weight on his leg.
And so he didn't put weight on his leg for over 5 days. And all of you are probably familiar with implicit bias training, which means we're all aware of the possibility, at least, that our minds have harmful programming that we aren't necessarily conscious of. And I want to go a little bit deeper than that today to talk a little bit about our subconscious minds. So our subconscious mind is programmed by the time we are 7 years old. And this is where it's really important. I wanted you to have some context before I explained how we responded to what my son said. So some examples of how this programming when it comes to the construction of race and racism is I did a little bit of research. And actually, I think the first time I started my exploration of how our subconscious mind is programmed when it comes to race and racism, it was a post that, I'm trying to remember, the Conscious Kid, I think it was, who posted. And they shared some research that was, mind-opening for me, and I want to share it with you. So at birth, babies look equally at faces of all races, and by 3 months, babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers. And children as young as 2 use race to reason about people's behaviors. By 30 months, most children use race to choose their playmates. Expressions of racial prejudice often peak at ages 4 and 5, and by kindergarten, children show many of the same racial attitudes held by the adults in their culture, and they've already learned to associate some groups with higher status than others. There was a study done by Dunham et al. In 2008 that showed that Black and Latino children in research settings show no preference toward their own racial groups as compared to white children at this age, who are more likely to be strongly biased in favor of whiteness. So that's some examples of the types of programming that we receive before the age of 7 when it comes to race and racism. And that is our subconscious mind. That is what influences over 90% of our reality. Our subconscious mind is what guides our autonomic nervous system. And our nervous system is what controls everything that we do, from our breathing to our walking, our thinking, and our feeling. And essentially, our nervous system gathers information from our external environments and our internal environment based on what we have experienced in the past. And it's based and 80 to 90% of that subconscious programming is based on how our nervous system received information in our past. So when we encounter, or our nervous systems encounter, any kind of new information or new stimuli, it will do one of the following. It will fight, flight, or freeze. Our unconscious minds are in charge of how we perceive the world. It's known as the primitive mind. So everything we are unaware of is in the subconscious mind. It is responsible for our beliefs, our fears, our values, our automatic thoughts, our imagination, our self-image, our identity, our habits, our emotions, our feelings. And it thinks in visuals, symbols, and metaphors. And it's wired to move away from pain and toward pleasure. That's a really quick explanation of our subconscious mind, but I think it's important for us to understand that, particularly when we are responding to a learning opportunity with our children when it comes to race and racism. So, how I responded. So we were at home where my son was in an environment he was familiar with, and I brought up the restaurant again. And I said, do you remember what you said at the restaurant when you were doing the survey about the server? Because at first I just wanted to see if it was something that he remembered, that it was in his mind as that he remembered, and that it was something new to him, because we had never heard anything like this before. And he actually said yes. And I asked him, so you remember what you said about our server? And he goes, yes. But he wouldn't be able, and this is something just with his, sometimes it is hard for our son to verbalize certain things. And so in this case, I knew that about him. And so I repeated what he said. I said, you mentioned this, and I repeated what he said. And I said, do you remember, or can you think about where you might have heard that before? Or what was going on in your mind or your body when you said that? And he goes, no. And we're used to talking about how our body feels and getting curious about what we are feeling and thinking in moments of saying certain things or having certain behavior. So that approach is not foreign to our son. And he says, no, it just kind of popped into my mind. And so then I asked, do you know why some of us have darker skin than others? Like, what is it that those of us that have darker skin, what is it that we have more of? And he says, melanin. And that again is because we have taught him that, and we have repeated that teaching in many areas of his learning experience, his young learning experience of 5 years. And I said, exactly. And so do you know people that we love and that we are close to that have more melanin in their skin than others? And so then he went through and he said, and I said, yes. So then I went on to explain that there are different shades of brown. Some have peachy tans to the color of caramel and chocolate cake. So I always use food as a comparison to explain the color of skin, because really it's not white skin. None of us have white skin and none of us have black skin. There's shades of brown. So you'll notice that in that conversation, I didn't say it's inappropriate to say that, don't say it again, because what our subconscious mind will hear is it'll put more focus on that. And I don't want him to focus on what he said as being a negative thing. I want him to focus on the beauty of the different shades and different percentages of melanin in our skin, and that we have people that we love that are all different shades of skin. So I think that's enough of the details of how I responded, but I wanted to share with you one final thing that we did, which our son loves to read. We have hundreds and hundreds of books organized on his bookshelf, and by the end of the week, half of that bookshelf is in the bed with him. And then on Sundays, we put the books back on the shelf, and every night he'll bring new books. So he just loves having books around him. So what I did is I went back upstairs and I made sure that certain titles that talk about the beauty of different shades of skin were in his bed, where he had easy access to. And so I thought I'd list some of those books, but if this is something that you'd love to like me to share, like the list of books about, or inclusive books on our son's shelf, I'm happy to maybe put a list together. So maybe I'll ask the collective and see if that would be helpful. But 4 books I wrote down that are staples in our house that we read on a weekly basis is The Colors of Us by Karen Katz. It actually talks about the different shades of brown and how mixing certain paint colors creates different shades. And then this young girl goes through her neighborhood and explains the different shades of brown of her friends and her family. And she compares them to yummy foods. There's the Anna and Andrew series by Christine Platt. So this is a brother and a sister who live in Washington, D.C. with their parents. And they have family from Savannah, Georgia, and they have family from Trinidad. And so there's multiple small chapter books, and it just talks about their experience with African-American history and culture. Beautiful series. There's also Stamped for kids. So this is for older kids, but it was adapted from Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning. So it was adapted by Jason Reynolds, Stamped for kids. And then there's When God Made You by Matthew Paul Turner. I think it's just beautiful imagery in that book and just a beautiful message. And then finally, Skin Like Mine. And it's a beautiful, what I would call poetry, by Latasha M. Perry. So again, let me know if you'd be interested in a list of our inclusive books on our son's shelf. And please, if you have any questions, or if you ever find yourself in a moment with your kids where you have an opportunity to teach, but you just don't know what to say, I share a lot of these examples in my liberatory embodiment program, which I'll probably open up doors for the second cohort next year sometime, early next year. But in the meantime, please send me a message or just comment. And I'd love to hear how you've handled situations and maybe open it up to the community if you're one that needs some support and some help. All right, enough for now. Bye, friends.